All right, so we'll start our last session this evening on humanism slash secularism and other things out there that inform people's worldview. And so I'm going to um, try to share this if I can figure out what I did with it. Okay, here we go. So I call the session Humanism, Secularism, and Smorgasbord Religion because it kind of pulls everything else together that we haven't talked about yet. And it's not meant as any kind of derogatory thing, it's more just to set out some other pieces for us this evening. So I want to start with definitions, describe some of that. I think sometimes we get a little bit sidetracked on the words when we don't know exactly what they mean or what is being meant when the word is used. So I'd like to start with the whole concept of humanism. And it's defined as a worldview or a philosophy that says the human experience, human life in this world is what gives it meaning and what's important. So it focuses in on human beings and their life on the earth. Having said that, we can say very clearly that humanism generally, by and large, refers to life without reference to God or gods or higher beings or entities. It's totally focused on what humans are, can be, have been, will be. Sometimes other terms are used. One is naturalism, another one is secularism, and once in a while you'll see the phrase here and now only thinking. So it focuses on what we have in the here and now and doesn't try to speculate about anything life after death. Humanism, as a understanding of the world, relies on science. It relies on empiricism, which is that piece of thinking that says, can I see it? Can I touch it? Can I taste it? It's that uh, physical experience of life that we have access to. It also relies on logic and logical thinking, and it relies on the reasoning that goes with that through the human mind. And then it also, of the last few years, I don't want to put an exact date on it, but I'm going to guess maybe 20. It relies on something that I don't know what else to call except feelings. And so that's why there's that little asterisk next to that. It's kind of a word to reflect postmodern thinking that refers to emotion or right feeling as a way of living. It's kind of difficult to describe in really concrete ways, but you'll hear this in people's comments or reflections or musings or discussions when they say things like, well, I'll know it when I see it, or it will feel right if it's right, so that it engenders some sort of positive response in people. And so that's why I use the word feeling. And you see that in a lot of people's discussions about what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, how life should be lived or not lived. So when we talk about humanism, there's some common themes, and one of them affirms human reason, that we can figure it out. It affirms compassion and responsibility and trustworthiness and all of those things that make up human existence. In other words, we can go there and depend on that to figure out what life can be and should be. It also affirms that human life in this world is good, is important. It's a part of this world, it's essential, and it affirms the worth, the dignity, and the equality of all human beings, regardless of who they are, where they've been, where they live. Those are important themes in any humanistic discussion. Some other ones are that meaning is found, is possible without referring to anything that's supernatural, beyond human existence, beyond that speculation. The spiritual may or may not be there in life, but it is not what gives life meaning. Humanism also is very fond of democracy, supports that to almost to extreme levels, some people would say. And it also says that ethical living is based on human experience, reason, and values. It doesn't refer to God, quote unquote, to derive any ethical standards for living. Humanism, go ahead. Did somebody want to make a comment?
All of that sounds very nice.
It does. It does. It's very positive, very upbeat, very encouraging, optimistic. Yeah, it is. It's all of those things. So
I have
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Unity. So we have a unity church here on the South Hill. So, and that's different, I think, though, than Unitarianism. I can't say that word, or they might be the same. So they would fit into this category.
I think so. Right? I would need to kind of check out a website or something that they had, because some of the Unitarian churches have adopted unity as their name, because Unitarianism is kind of a mouthful and people go, what the heck is that? And it carries too much theological baggage, and they really are focusing on being a unified group. So it could be that they're a humanist group, or it could be that they are Unitarians. I don't know for sure. Yeah, there was one of those in Great Falls too, and it was a Unitarian church.
Some of the Unitarians have kind of splintered from each other because of what you just said, Patty, haven't they?
I think so, yeah. They have a divergent opinions on
exactly.
God and where God fits in, and how much they should impose those ideas on others. And it's kind of confusing, to me at least.
Well, I used to know a woman that went to the Unity Church, and she told me that you do whatever feels good as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. And that may mean God is with you. It may not mean. It's just what the individual feels.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's a crazy religion.
Yeah. And I would think that that's probably what I have come to understand a more current manifestation, if I can use that word, of the Unitarian Universalists. They've kind of tried to open the tent even further to include those who are going, God, maybe, maybe not. And if you're wanting something to make life better, then we'll welcome you in and we can figure it out.
Wow.
There's a branch of the Quaker Friends Church that's a little bit like that too. It's kind of an odd. They're considered the liberal end of the Quaker movement, the Friends Church. Yeah. Good questions. Other comments. Again, I just want to remind you that because of the screens up for me, I can't see any of you. So you'll have to just, bang on something or interrupt me. We'll have that conversation.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. So how does humanism and religion then fit together? A lot of humanist thinkers would say the sacred and the secular, the God and the not God, if you will, cannot and should not be separated. So there's the sacred in the secular, and there's secular in the sacred, and that's appropriate. Sacred doesn't necessarily mean God, however. For them, it just means that there's some things that are more important than others, at the very least. Both the secular and the sacred believe in the innate basic goodness of human beings. That is to say, when anyone is born, they are basically good. And it's their belief that you
Good.
learn bad stuff in your environment, the way you're raised, human tendencies, if they could be nurtured well, would move
2 years.
more and more and more
2 years.
towards goodness and wholeness. We would
Basically different
choose that.
ethnicities.
They would want us to take the context into account when making ethical decisions. So there tend not to be absolutes for the humanist thinker, but they want to look at the whole picture and then make a decision. And they wish to eliminate superstition and highlight the significance of human needs and hopes and values. And so they would look at almost all of the religions that we've discussed over the last 8 weeks as having elements of superstition in them, because after all, how do you prove some of the things that are said, that are believed, that are practiced? And so they look at that and say, well, that seems to be a little bit like if you do this and you do it right, then X will happen. And there's a certain amount of magic sense in that. And so they tend not to feel like that's an important or helpful piece in human life. It leaves too many question marks. Right now, as things are, there are 3 basic humanist statements out there. You can go look these up. These are the names of them. One is called the Humanist Manifesto, number 1, and it was written in 1933. And it was an optimistic, upbeat document that extolled religious humanism. It was kind of a new statement, and the purpose of it was to critique religion and religious practices without being hostile to any particular religion. So that was the first statement. The second one, same kind of group put it together, worked on it. They renamed this revision, if you will, the Human Manifesto number 2, and it was written in 1973. And it was confident, it gave off this confidence that people could solve the problems of human existence and all the changes that that are needed in life, that humans could figure that out. There was great confidence in the human ability to do that. It was different than the first statement because it felt that religion could not be reinvented significantly or sufficiently, and so something new was needed. They didn't think that hell and eternal life were helpful. In fact, they weren't needed because they tended to be harmful in helping people figure out how to live life better and live together. You have to remember that this all came out of some pretty sobering events. By this time, World War I had happened, and World War II had happened, and the Korean War had happened, and the Vietnam War was in high gear at that point. So there were some pretty significant human tragedies, some wars, some ethnic cleansing wars in Africa. There were some pretty difficult economic things that happened as well. And so that framed this Human Manifesto too. Then there was another one written in 1980 called the Secular Humanist Manifesto, and it outlines an explicitly secular humanism that feels it, because it feels like humanism itself, the idea was under attack, and it accuses and names certain religious groups as promoting unthinking reliance on authority, restricting human freedom. So they were pushing back assertively against religion at that point. So you can see a progression between 1933 and 1980 that it was, well, we can kind of get along with religion, to not so much to an aggressive pushback. And that has not been rewritten as of yet. So this has become a very significant forefront statement for a lot of humanistic thinkers. There are 5 of the largest, I should say there aren't only 5, but 5 of the largest organizations are called these. If you want to go and look them up, you might find some interest there. Somebody might tell you that they're a part of those: the Ethical Culture Society, the American Humanist Association, Friends of Religious Humanism, Society for Humanistic Judaism, and the Campus Free Thought Alliance. Of all of those, I think probably the last one tends to be more widely known. You might see it in the news once in a while. The purpose of all of these kinds of organizations is to provide the same kind of emotional and intellectual support for members as religions do. There is both that intellectual and emotional support that we all feel as members and attenders and participants in the engaged church, and so they're wanting to do that as well. But they represent one way people organize their lives into a meaningful fashion without reference to religion. Now, yes.
Do they, with religious organizations, they have regular meetings that they call church. Do these people meet on a regular basis? And if they do they discuss what?
Yeah. And I think that it depends on the group. They may have kind of an annual meeting. They may have chapters where they do get to together and meet and have discussions about, how do we address these particular issues of society? How do we address, I think I heard just a snippet of a reference not too long ago to one of those groups trying to pull people together from divergent political groups to see if they could engage in, re-engage in, or encourage some kind of positive interaction with people who are on polar opposite ends of the political spectrum. And that's their goal, is to try to figure out how to help people do that without reference to God. I can't.
Wow, so there's no prayer?
No.
Oh, gosh.
No prayer. Why would you pray?
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh, I
who would
couldn't
you
stand
pray
that.
to?
Yeah, who would you pray
Exactly.
to? The whole point is, how do we get down to business to learn new ways of doing things so we make this life better in the here and now for ourselves, but also for other people around us?
Wow.
They probably have book clubs.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. They probably have readings that they do, or articles that they read together, they discuss together. The organizations are so diverse that you really can't say, oh, they all do this or they all do that. It just kind of depends on which group you're a part of as to what happens.
Well, something might feel good to one group and feel better to another group.
Sure, absolutely.
I wanted to say that I attended a wedding reception at the Unity Church up here on 29th that Leslie referred to. And it was actually their female pastor her wedding reception. And at that time, they were closely affiliated with the other Unity Church that's down by Spokane Falls campus and Government Way. And I was really taken aback with the beer kegs and the huge bunch of wine and stuff. And what they had done is just cleared out what I thought was their sanctuary. I don't know what they would call it. And then they had tables and dancing. And I was aghast when I looked over and saw men dancing with men slow dancing. And I said something to somebody sitting nearby, and they said, "Oh, yes, we embrace all of mankind."
Yes.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes. Yeah.
It sounds
Absolutely.
nice.
And if you have no particular concern or belief about the hereafter, about life after death, about God,
Mm-hmm.
then why would you not enjoy life to its fullest extent? It's
Mm-hmm.
I've told students in the past, as I've read a little bit about this, it felt to some degree like a resurgence of the old Greek philosophy of Epicureanism.
Mm.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, which is
Great point.
in its best form, it was, enjoy the finest things of life. Don't waste your energies on the dregs, if you will, or dragging yourself into places that don't feel good. So an epicurist will enjoy the finest of foods and take great care to fix good meals, because life is too short to waste it on boxed macaroni and cheese.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that whole idea seems to have been recovered in the humanistic groups or thinking. Those are all really good points that you're bringing out.
Okay,
In the
but
back-
another thing that she's talking about too is the little slogan on all the liberal signs that people put in on their lawn. Love is love. Kind of gets that same point too.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody's in favor of love. You can't be against love.
How could you be against that?
Yeah, really.
Right.
You can't be against love. So, and love is love. So what's the problem?
Yeah, right. And why complicate it?
Mhm.
In the back of my mind somewhere, it seems like I've seen like a monthly devotional sort of thing published by Unity that's kind of like the Daily Word or something like that. I don't know what would be in it if they don't believe in scripture, or if they're just sort of, like Pat's talking about, all you need is love, and, stuff like that. Do you know if there's anything like that?
No. Yeah, I was just going to say I haven't seen that, so I can't really speak with any kind of clear idea about what would be in it. I have a guess. I'm guessing it would be thoughts on, positive thinking. They might even embrace people that we would recognize as Christian because
Mhm.
they had positive things to say about life, like Norman Vincent Peale and the power of positive thinking, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
And do you have any idea
ironic.
what kind
It's
of
ironic that. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
No, I'm thinking it's ironic that they don't be the primary sponsor of like the Food Network, or because the irony is the operative word of Epicurean describes fine food, fine dining, fine this, fine that, and one of the subtle ironies of the Unitarian movement is enjoy your time on earth. And in our faith, we try to emphasize, helping and loving on brothers and sisters, but one of the intrinsic motives of that is enjoy the heck out of yourself while you can.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what's coming next, or you don't believe anything is, I guess that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Go buy the blue tray steaks at Costco instead of the white tray steaks.
Yeah,
Those kinds of things.
Right. JC, did you have something else you wanted to offer?
Oh, I was just kind of curious. Do you have any idea what sort of numbers we're talking about?
I don't. And that's one of those things where you might belong officially and pay dues, or you might adhere to the ideas without paying dues and going to meetings. So
Kind of like a club.
Yeah. So it's hard to know. Yeah. I don't.
I would also be curious to know how fast it's growing.
Yeah. Well, I'm as a formal movement, I can't speak to that, but I would say as an informal mindset, informally as a mindset or as a worldview, it is growing. And
Yeah.
almost everyone who pays attention to culture and society will tell you that secularism is on the rise in the United
Yeah.
States. Yeah.
It's almost like a cult.
Um,
We have seen so many cults in the last 50 years.
yeah.
They come and they go.
This one, in that regard, I don't think is going to go away.
Yeah.
No. Okay, good. So when it comes
It's
to
a method.
that, let me move on to these a couple of other keywords that will pop up if you
Mhm.
have a conversation with somebody about stuff like this. And the first one is the word atheism, and it comes from two Greek words, and it basically means without a belief in God. The Greek word that stands for the letter A as without, and theism is God. So without a belief in God, a true atheist will deny the existence of God. Okay? They will say that belief in God is a false belief. And
Wow.
when they say God, they understand God to be understood as the independent creator of the world, a being of superlative power, great, huge power, wise and good. That being, God, does not exist. Okay? And I'm telling you, I'm giving you this definition and this understanding, not so you have points for an argument, so that you can find a place to begin with somebody who might say, well, I'm an atheist. Okay, how would you engage that person? You would automatically think, okay, that person does not believe God exists. If they don't believe God exists, then where are you going to engage them in conversation to build a relationship? That's the question. That's different than agnosticism. People who say, well, I'm an agnostic, they're saying, I don't know if God exists. Maybe God does, maybe God doesn't. I just don't know if God exists. And they might also say, well, because everybody has such different ideas about all of this, it's impossible to know if God really exists. And so they will say, well, you say God exists, but as I've thought about it, that evidence for the existence of God is really not convincing or conclusive. So that, again, that's not offered so you have places to start an argument, but you have places to say, okay, so if this person isn't sure about the existence of God, how would I talk to that person? How would I engage in a conversation with them? How would I build a relationship with that person? So those are
You know
two.
that, oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, the sad part about this is that young people are being led to being an agnostic or a atheist because of how they teach how the world began,
Yes.
and so then they think they don't need God. You know, my granddaughter told me that the part of the Bible where God created the world is not true because in science they've proved that two stars or planets or something collided, and that's how Earth was formed. And I said, well, who created the whatever it was she said that collided? And she goes, well, we haven't studied that part yet.
Yeah.
And then this was last fall, and then we had another conversation a couple of weeks ago because I asked her if they learned that yet, and she goes, well, I can't remember. She's just kind of boring, so I don't pay attention. But she said, and I go, well, when you read a book, Jalen, do you just take the part you want to believe and forget about the rest, or you believe the whole thing? Because she actually does believe that God exists. So I go, you know, when you look at that as a whole, you have to take it all.
Right.
You know,
and
so
those are the kinds of conversations that I really believe people are open to if the person they're talking to doesn't come across as judgmental or condescending.
right.
Oh,
Mhm.
you're such a poor soul. You don't get it.
Oh,
You know,
gosh. Yeah,
you
no,
know, you gotta be careful of that, because
right.
that won't open any doors for an agnostic. It'll just make
Mhm.
them feel unsafe at least, and
Right.
not wanting to talk to you at most.
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
it's easier, I guess, as grandma to do this because they know
Mhm.
how I believe and they know that I'm just trying to understand what they believe and it's
Yeah,
all done, you know.
exactly. But your next door neighbor might be in the same bucket, just had 30 more years of that rattling around in their head without any other place to really think about it. So we need to be safe places to examine that, because I
Right.
believe God will use those.
Hmm.
God will use those. So why in the world would anyone gravitate toward atheism, agnosticism, or humanism? Why would they do that? Well, there's the psychological part
Mhm.
that is
Yeah.
appealing to people. You know, that it can be explained through personality. It can be explained through how people um, are genetically. That makes some sense, or it makes some sense sociologically. You live in a group, you live in a society, you live in a culture, you live in a family that they believe this way, so you believe that way. And why else would you believe something else? Another different kind of reason for all of this is that um, religion, I've already said this, tends not to be consistent with the scientific view of reality. And what Leslie just shared is a prime example of that. Well, if you can show scientifically that the Earth was created by the explosion of stars and it happened over billions of years, and then you pick up the book of Genesis and it said God created the world on the fourth day or the third day or whatever it was, day. Okay, how does that work? And so we have to be careful to not be unthinking as we listen and talk with people who work through this kind of thing, because that's what they've been taught in school. Obviously, there's got to be some kind of truth in that science, or it wouldn't be there. So
Hmm.
that becomes a part of the discussion. Another reason for humanism is that God is kind of an ambiguous use of language, they say. What does that mean? When you say God, what do you mean? The church that John pastored in California, um, we had a small group session and have kind of a general teaching time, and then they'd break up into discussion groups. And I invited a student from the college when I was teaching there. And he got in this group with some of the older ladies, and he thought it was wonderful. But John asked a question, and so they all started talking about it. And one of the ladies, who was one of the saints of the church, said, well, God, I can't even remember what the question was, but she said something like, well, Jesus is the Son of God, and he said, wait a minute, stop right there. Jesus is the Son of God. Who are you talking about? Didn't have a concept. And I felt bad for the dear saint, because she had to go, well, you know, God. And she didn't have any more language than that, because that had always been a part of her life for the last 50 years. And so it made sense to her. But for this person who had no background in the church, no background in religion, when somebody said Jesus is the Son of God, he had no reference point for that. And that's where humanists come out at. They're saying, what do you mean, God? What are you talking about? It's ambiguous language. It doesn't make any sense.
Wow.
And that's followed by, once you kind of get past the idea of God, then they will say, many of them wrestle at a soul level with, how do you say God? God is all powerful. God is loving. God is. And there's so much suffering in the world. The classic question, if God is so good, how can he allow so much terrible stuff to happen? And that's an honest question for folks. So they tend to set God aside and go, well, God's not fixing it, so I guess we better get with it and fix it. Some other reasons very quickly that
It's a
humanists
good
go
definition
that
of
direction
humanism.
is that they believe that belief in God is incompatible with a belief in the autonomy and worth of a person. What do you mean God told me I have to do something, and if I don't, I'm going to end up in hell? I thought that was kind of a bogus statement until I had a student come to me. He and his wife came to the church in Great Falls for several weeks, and they were getting ready to, they'd been in Sunday school class and they were leaving. And I said, you're not going to stay for worship? You have other plans today? And he said, no, I can't do this anymore. Okay, tell me about that. And he said, you said during Sunday school class that we have a choice. I said, right. I think that's what I said. He said, we can choose God or not choose God. Right. And if we don't choose God, then we will go where the place where God is not, because we chose that. And I said, yep, that's how I understand it. That's how I experience it. And he said, there's got to be another choice. If you don't choose God, there's got to be something else besides hell. And he walked out.
Wow.
Did not come back.
So you've had some time to think about it. Have you come up with what you should have said?
No.
No.
Well, what could you have said?
But because I don't know that there's another answer.
Right.
Right.
If you believe that there's a God, it seems like you either choose God or you don't choose God.
Yeah. And that was the whole thing. He wasn't there yet.
He didn't like the options, basically.
Yeah.
You know, Patty, I commend you for sharing that, because one of the greatest gifts that we have that we take for granted is he gave us freedom of choice.
Exactly.
You know, and that young man chose a path, but you know, he can be born again. He can be involved in salvation. It's not an end all. It's like in our society, it's like many times we say, well, that guy chose that path and he's stuck with that for life.
Mm-hmm.
The most beautiful thing about our faith is we can get redeemed immediately.
Right. And I have every belief in the grace of God, that seeds were planted and God will use those, and I may not know till the other side. That's okay. But
that's a great story you shared, Patty. That's incredible.
I know that he heard while he was with us that God loved him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know that.
And isn't that our simple job?
Absolutely. And that's why I've kind of harangued you all, if I can use that word, to remember that it's not about us being right. It's about us finding ways to understand other people and adequately share the best we can with whatever gifts and skills we've been given at the moment, the words and the timing, the love of God for those people. And God will do the rest. God will do the rest.
Amen. Amen.
Back to the humanism part. God's not a factor for many people in their lives.
Oh,
you know, they wake up on Sunday morning and it's a day off and they want to think about something to enjoy life. God doesn't come into the equation, into the options. So I want to say, if people are functionally that way, they may say, oh, well, I grew up in a Presbyterian church, or I grew up in a Catholic church, or whatever. I have some reference, I know something about it, but they functionally live as a humanist, and they begin to be drawn into our group, our socialness, our social circles, our relationships, and we invite them to church and they say, oh yeah, I'll come with you, and then Sunday comes and they don't show up, don't get too excited. It's not on their radar yet.
Right.
It's not something they go, oh yeah, Sunday church. Like, oh, Sunday, if I wake up, I'm going to do that. When I wake up, I'm going to do, kind of thing.
Right.
And so they might do something and do something else and do something else. And then 4:00 in the afternoon is like, oh, I told that person I was going to go to church with them and I completely forgot about it. They're not being crazy, weird, rude. It's not in their sphere yet.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not in the wheelhouse, right?
Humanists functionally or willfully think that the belief in God takes away from the proper focus of working to make this life better. This life is devalued if you put it in comparison with the next life. That's what they hear when they hear sermons about heaven and you need to be ready for heaven. It's like, well, this life is chopped liver. And so they go, nah, this life is too important. And so we do have to say that some of our brothers and sisters do give that kind of message off. Here's some more reasons. Religious activists are responsible for much of the terror and the violence in the world, they say. And that's often said. I want to make you aware that that is an argument, but it's not based on proper understandings of the cause and effects, or the understanding of religion that religion brings to an adherent of the religion. They don't quite understand all the connecting pieces, so that's how they view it from the outside. They read history and they see the Crusades, they see the current stuff, and the people who have hijacked some portions of Islam for political reasons. They see that and go, see there, religion just starts wars. So we don't need that. I don't need that in my life. They also look at traditional religious views and think they're kind of meaningless and exploiting people. And your description, Marie, of the wedding reception makes me think that the Unity Church is really a humanistic group. I just can't say if they're loosely tied to the Unitarian movement or not.
Right.
They would say that the traditional teachings of the church are kind of meaningless. Why can't people love who they want to love? Why do people have to give their money and be made to feel guilty when they don't give their money to the church? So they find those things difficult. Okay, any comments you want to make about this? Any of that stuff I've mentioned here?
Well, another one of the little phrases you used to hear a little bit was pie in the sky by and by.
Exactly.
So they were saying, if you believe in pie in the sky by and by, then you're not going to work for any type of social justice while you're here.
Correct.
Because this is not the life that matters.
Right. And we probably need to own some of that, because the church has been weak in some ways when it comes to standing up for people who are oppressed. We have been more concerned about our own internal workings than we have been about the injustices around us. And in some regards, we probably need to own that. Some groups more than others. I'm not pointing fingers at any particular group, but as Christians or as religions, there is some truth to that. That there are some pieces that don't make sense.
Okay. Supposedly, too, in Mao's Little Red Book, once I'm not quoting it correctly, but somehow a belief in a life after death is the enemy of progress.
And
an enemy of progress.
Yeah, yeah.
Supposedly that's in Mao's little red book,
Right, right. And so
or some variation of that statement.
yeah, we have to hear the truth that's there without apologizing for the truth we hold, that humans are not perfect. And I have to say, as an aside, the one piece that I don't find addressed in humanist thought is the fact that people are imperfect and they choose bad stuff. They don't quite know what to do with that.
Patty, that's an awesome point that you just made just now, because it goes back to the theme that Madison Avenue figured out back in the 30s. That's 90 years ago. And that is simply that we design a message that hits about 80% of the people. And that message is directed at people that are easily swayed. The psychologists would call them supporters.
Mm-hmm.
We used to say in marketing, those are people, that's John and Mary Lunchbucket, that go to work every day, love their country. They're easily swayed through messages because the medium itself, whether it's television, radio, newspapers, the medium becomes the message. And if they see it or hear it on the medium, that is the truth. And these offshoot organizations, you just threw up the Church of Scientology. So some of these offshoot things, they use the marketing skills way better than the Christian community, particularly in the 20th century.
Right, right.
Okay. Also, you mentioned that first humanist thing back in 1933.
Correct.
It reminded me of the phrase, religion died on the field of Flanders.
And there are, I think I mentioned this when we talked about Judaism, there are lots of Jews who are Jews by ethnicity, but they're not religious Jews, they're not practicing Jews because they believe God died in the Holocaust.
Yeah, good point.
They say that, I've read a little bit of stuff written by people in England, that they lost the majority of their brightest and their best in the trenches of World War I, and they have never recovered. The church, the business, the politics, they lost their best thinkers. The only exception they would make to that perhaps might be Winston Churchill.
Yeah. But when you think about the dominant theology during World War I,
right,
and how we're all getting better and God's kingdom is being formed on earth, that kind of thing, that's not compatible with World War I.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's not compatible with any of the terrible things that have happened in the last 100 years. And I think, again, that's another point of conversation with people, is to say, how do you see that working out in the face of, genocide of the Zulu people in Africa, or, whatever.
Well, this is a little bit off the subject, but for me, that's why dispensational theology is so appealing to people. Because instead of getting better and building God's kingdom on earth, it's the world is going to hell in a handbasket.
Exactly.
It more closely, reflects what we see.
Exactly.
And it's not particularly an optimistic theology either.
No.
Except we're the good guys and we get to go to heaven. But
exactly.
But I mean, the theology itself is not particularly optimistic.
No, it's not. It's not.
And there's a certain, that's part of the appeal, I think, of that way of thinking.
Right. Right. So we have about 10, 12 minutes left. And I have, I'm counting here, 7 slides of things I could share with you about Scientology, but I also wanted to spend a few minutes at the end talking about the so what. What do we do with all of this stuff that we've learned? So I guess I need a little direction from you all how you'd like to move forward. I can zip through the Scientology things in about 8 minutes. That'll put us right at the hour almost. Leave, if you're willing to spend a few minutes after 8 visiting about now what, that would be good. I just don't want to leave that part off as a concluding piece.
No, I'm all for zipping through it.
Yeah, me too.
Do the Gonzaga fast break. You might be able to do it in 8 minutes or less.
Okay, okay.
But I think too, we have to remember that Scientology, according to them, is also a religion of love and joy.
Exactly, exactly.
I mean, they think they're out promoting love and joy,
They do.
and nobody can be against that.
They do. They do. and it, well, it's kind of a mix of humanism and religion. So I thought it was kind of a nice thing. And some of you had expressed interest in Scientology several weeks ago. So I thought I'd throw this in there, and I will do whatever you called that, Rick. I will do that really quick. All right. So
I'm sorry, Patty, take as much time as you want.
yeah. No, I don't want to presume upon y'all's time that you've set aside for this. So, founded by L. Ron Hubbard, he was born in 1911, died in 1986. His original thesis he put together in 1948, and then wrote a book later called Dianetics. You've probably seen that one advertised on TV. Not so much anymore, but 15 years ago, man, it was always being advertised. And basically, his thought was that human souls, or thetans, appeared early in creation. I might call it the giants that are mentioned in the book of Genesis, kind of like that. He taught that life is comprised of MEST, which is matter, energy, space, and time, and that makes up the entire piece of the empirical universe. However, because the thetas messed up, they fell into the MEST. I have a hard time. I'm not laughing out loud. I'm sorry. I take this out, Devin, when you edit it, because it almost sounds like mess to me. And they came to Earth. The Church of Scientology believes that Scientology, the whole teaching, the whole work, the whole church, finishes the work that Buddhists, Hinduists, and some Western ideologies started. And it teaches that there are two basic functions of the mind. So they're very much into the thinking piece of this, the analytical and the reactive. And if you start asking me really detailed questions about this, I'm not going to have any answers, because I've tried to read a little bit on it, but I feel like I just go around in circles. So let me offer this as kind of a summary of the teaching. Individual consciousness, known as the thetan, has the capacity to separate mind from body and to create the phenomenal world of MEST, matter, energy, space, and time. Thus, the origin of MEST lies in the thetan. And this is really important in their teaching, and probably what anyone that you talk to would be most familiar with. To be clear, quote unquote, that is to be totally free, is to fully understand how one is a thetan, and thereby to gain control over mind and body. In the words of Scientology, to be clear is the equivalent to being an arhat, a bodhisattva, didn't say that word right, and an avatar. And it comes from the book World Faiths on page 252. So once you become clear, you are someone that can be followed and can teach. So what that turns out to be is that you become clear, you reach that initial stage, and the next step is to become an operating thetan, which is a higher state of consciousness that you possess, that you learn to have. And beyond those higher levels is the highest level identified by Hubbard as the operating Thetan 7. Okay. And for Scientology, the, the church combines the elements of the past and the present from kind of a Greco-Roman, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian beliefs and modern psychology and a technological pragmatism. All of those things are kind of wrapped up together in their understanding and in their teachings. To survive, a Thetan must be assisted, and that includes the family, the group, and then all people. So that's why there's these groups or these pods of people that get together. 4 other dynamics in the life for them is the life form, the physical universe, the spirits, and infinity or God, which they often refer to the allness of all. If I sound like I'm babbling, I apologize, but I've taken this stuff directly out of their works, okay? God is defined then by the individual, okay? So the goal of Scientology is to reach that state of clear, and that is the ability to remove obstacles and be what and where a person is. In one set of teachings in Buddhism, they refer to the best state of being as being here now. And that's another way of saying that in Buddhism. In this, it's to be clear, which is to be what and where a person is. You are where you are who you are here and now. And here's the website for if you are inclined to read a little more on it. It's a challenge. I've read through some of the website. It's sometime if you're interested, I have on a DVD about an hour interview with L. Ron Hubbard that was conducted, and they asked him questions and then he would answer the questions. I've shown this to my religion classes, allowing about time for about half of it, and after about 15 minutes, almost all of the students would say, "Turn that off, the guy is creepy." So if that doesn't get your interest going, I don't know what will, but I have that, and we could look at it at the church at some point when we're able to do that. If you're interested, just let me know.
Okay. From what you just said, this sounds awful lot like the Buddhism when you were talking about Buddhism.
Yeah,
moving from one higher state to the other to an
yes.
ultimate state,
Yes.
in which you are part of the allness of all.
Right.
And
right.
then in that kind, sounds like a remake of Buddhism to me.
It does, but they will use what's the term? Biofeedback loops to help a person attain that clearness. So they believe in using that kind of technology, and Buddhists wouldn't do that. So that's part of the difference. Yeah.
If you'd like a really good book on Scientology, I've read a bunch of these just because it's so wacky, but it's called Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood, and the Prison of Belief.
Okay.
And it's written by a guy named Lawrence Wright, who was really involved in there, and he's an investigative reporter, and he writes about getting out of there. And there's also an HBO documentary that goes along with that. And it's really smarmy. You know, it's like trying to leave the mob. You know, you don't, if you're a made person, you don't leave the mob. And if you're a Thetan, or if you're being audited and trying to go clear, and you decide to live it up, you're shunned, and they'll even put hits out on you.
Yeah. The group gives me quite a bit of pause. We talked last time about cults and what's a cult and what's not a cult. I'm willing to go on the record as saying I believe that Scientology is a cult because
I agree.
It does not allow a person free choice after you kind of get through the initial stages, and that in my mind, is one of the descriptors of a cult, is that your free will is taken away from you. Okay, so I want us to conclude our time by reminding ourselves why we've done all of this. Why have we spent 9 weeks getting acquainted with things that are completely different from where we're at, even make us uncomfortable, that we believe are wrong or unhelpful or even detrimental to people? Why have we done this? And it is again to make ourselves ready to share Christ with someone, to give a reason for the hope that we have, that we can understand better where they're coming from, but that we can be clear with them about the hope that we have, but that we do it with gentleness and respect for that person. And so I want to spend the last couple minutes ask to make these points again, that as followers of Christ, we are called to be about the other person. We're not in this to try to do the work of the Spirit. We're just not. We need to let the Spirit do the Spirit's work. Instead, we need to seek to be the instrument of the Holy Spirit. It's not about being right. It's about presenting, representing, demonstrating the love of Christ to others. That's why we've done all of this. And so I want to end with this question. How might you use all that you've learned about all these other viewpoints? How might you use all of that?
I think the best answer is respectfully.
Yeah.
Patty, if that's a question,
Yes.
I think the best answer that I can think of is, if you're going to answer any of that, is respectfully. And one of the neatest answers to a question is, I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I understand.
Or I hear
this.
you.
Or I hear, yeah, Marie said, I hear you. And then you can start a discussion, because if you open that conversation with just that simple phrase, you're not being judgmental.